I'm Ian Yates, the Chief Executive of CODA Australia. CODA Australia is the peak body for older Australians, the consumer peak if you like, with CODAs in every state and territory, about 1,100 member organisations reaching out to about 500,000 older Australians, as well as about 30,000 people who belong directly to state and territory CODAs. And we represent CODA and older people in a wide variety of government advisory bodies as well as across the sector. Well, March 2017, service providers will have to adapt to the next phase of consumers having much greater influence over aged care. The consumer will have the right to take their aged care package to another provider. I think it's important for providers to see it this way as a step on the road to that also being the case in residential care and in what we currently call community home support. So what that will mean is that the consumer has much greater say in terms of who's going to be their provider in the package space, and that's going to be, as I said, a precursor for the sector as a whole. I think it will focus the attention of providers on what it is that would make someone choose them as their aged care provider. And even if they're the only provider in an area, which in some rural contexts might be the case, it raises also the prospect that there might be interest in developing alternative providers. In this day and age, with alternative technologies and new platforms, we are going to see more diversity. The change will, from a consumer point of view, look like I've got more choice where I put my package. From a progressive provider, from a provider who's confident that they're meeting the needs of consumers, they will for the first time be able to go out and say, if you've got a package, think about coming to us. We're pretty good at dealing with things how you want. So it won't just be a passive, the consumer finding someone else. It will create the potential, the opportunity for providers who are good at meeting the needs of consumers to expand, whereas at the moment they can only expand if they get more packages through a government-approved process. Now they'll be able to get more packages by attracting more consumers. Having a more competitive market in aged care will certainly strengthen the hand of consumers. It will be an important driver of quality improvement over time, not because someone set a standard that you all have to meet and get inspected for, but because consumers will pick quality over time and they will migrate to what they regard as quality services. It will also force the sector to think about not only doing things better, but doing things more efficiently. Because if two providers providing the same quality of service, one of them can do it at 3/4 of the price of the other one, they're going to be able to provide more service to the consumer as well. So it is actually going to put onto a sector that's been heavily regulated the opportunity to free itself up, be more imaginative, do things differently, and think creatively about doing things more efficiently as well as effectively. Obviously, these have implications for organisations. These changes competitively will mean that what kind of workforce you can attract is going to be important. If you've got a current workforce, are they adaptable to this kind of environment? If you're successful, your chances of attracting a better class of workforce will also increase. I think they also need to be looking at IT systems, which I think are an essential part of a more efficient operation in aged care. It means that they have to have processes for understanding what consumer needs are like. I'm hoping that we will see more providers talking to organisations like ours about what it is that consumers want. We've spent decades working towards these reforms. We've been listening to consumers for years. Boards and CEs will also need to think about the fact that their colleagues are also now in a more direct way their potential competitors. They'll have to think about what they're good at and what they're not good at and whether they want to stay in those games or get out of them. And they'll have to think about a much more flexible form of planning and be more adaptive as an organisation than in the days when they felt that the government was providing them with a guaranteed floor of business and all they had to do was complain once a year about how much money the government was giving them. In the aged care system we have at the moment, there is certainly a great deal of fear and resistance to complaining. Obviously, people do complain, but we meet many people who don't want to rock the boat because the power imbalance is not only the normal one that operates between a provider of services in a market and a consumer of services, particularly where the provider's there all the time and the consumer's only there a bit of the time. But in this market, the consumer actually doesn't have any control over the product. The provider has it at the moment. People will unlikely just say at the first jump, "Oh, I didn't like you doing that, I'm taking my package somewhere else." They're more likely to say, "I didn't like that, could you do it differently for me?" And if then they say no, then they can take it somewhere else. This is part of the power shift for consumers. But that culture of not complaining and so on will persist for some time. These changes won't all happen uniformly overnight. Many older people have been the subject of ageism and discrimination for many years. They come to aged care already feeling disheartened and not empowered. And one of our tasks is going to be and getting government to ensure that consumers have information, advice and support when they exercise those choices. Look, I think we'll see early on quite an emphasis from some on what one might say commercial marketing techniques of promotion. I think that some of that's not a bad thing. It's making your wares known out there to potential consumers. Over time, I think we will have a monitoring of the quality of the services, and that quality will become the big differentiator. Services will have to learn that it's not how slick your marketing is, it's actually your delivery. Slick marketing might bring them in, but if they are not happy and go away again, you're going to get a significant amount of churn. And for a good provider, keeping your clients with you is one of the ways of introducing efficiencies over time. I hope that what we will see is people putting more effort into working out what it is that their potential customers want, rather than slick marketing to attract people in the door without being able to deliver. At one level, it's very clearly understanding who it is that they're appealing to, understanding what they're good at, because not all aged care providers have to do exactly the same thing. People ask me often whether this will mean the end of small providers, and my answer is not if they're good at what they do. And indeed, it will be the case that there will be a more generic kind of, say, community care provider who will want to partner with a more specialised or niche provider who can provide something that's maybe a minority appeal, but an important part of the market, and they work together. There'll be smaller providers who understand key market segments much better than the main market does, as is the case in all sorts of aspects of our world. But the key issue will be how well you are responding creatively to the needs of the consumer, the degree to which you can, because this is not a one-way street, it's a dialogue to which you can provide the consumer with a range of choices. Word of mouth is and always will be an important part of this process, as indeed will it be the introduction of more, let's say, market-based type rating systems, star rating type schemes introduced, more TripAdvisor type schemes in the game. So all of those things in the end, I think, boil down to a combination of high quality and value for money. The consumer in this process has a much more conscious sense of the amount of money that's available to them, and therefore will be looking for what value they're getting from that money between various providers. At the moment, the fear is that if you fall out with your provider, there's certainly no guarantee you'll find another one with a package at your level that suits you in your area, because all of that is now controlled. This really is a game changer in that it removes all those constraints and says to the consumer, you've got control of this, you're putting it with a provider, but if you're not happy, you can move it, you can take it somewhere else. Providers will have new ways of reaching out to consumers and new ways of doing business that will mean that they can operate in places they haven't operated before, the good ones. Where they specialise and appeal to market segments, that'll be another feature, I think, of the market in a way that we haven't had before. Organisations that have not yet started preparing really need a very hard look at themselves. I would say that they need to look hard at their governance competence. We've known about these changes now since the May 2015 budget. They weren't announced as maybes, they're definites, they've got dates on them. Providers should have already been anticipating this as something to come in the reasonably near future. People who haven't started thinking it through and preparing for it may end up well behind the eight ball. If you haven't started planning for the February 2017 changes by now, you better start catching up very quickly. At a governance level, it should have been something that was on the radar before the announcement in the May 2015 budget, because it was always going to be part of the next step. You've got IT to get ready, you've got workforce planning to do, you've got understanding what your market is going to be like. All of those things people need to be working on already. And that's part of the problem in this sector. People have not always got on the front foot. They're used to being told by government what they should do. Now they're being told by government the rules are being taken away. You're to some degree on your own. How well will you do at meeting the needs of older consumers? In smaller rural areas, I think there are a number of things. One is the same questions as everyone else. What are we in business for? Who are we serving? What are their needs? I think that it would be dangerous for rural operators who might be the only one in an area to assume that they won't face competition into the future, because the system has been opened up. There will be new ways of working, new IT platforms that will enable providers from other areas to connect workers and consumers, and that will change the game as well. So shouldn't be complacent that just because you've got a monopoly at the moment, that will stay the way. The other thing to think about is in terms of efficiencies of operation. Are there ways of partnering? Are there ways of a number of us in the area working together? Are there larger providers who can provide back office or other services to us at a more efficient rate than we are doing it ourselves? Think about those things that keep you in the game. At all levels, providers need to think about what it is that their core business is going forward. Is this what they want to stay in? Or is it maybe something that they ought to get out of and leave to the people who are going to be good at it and grow in the space? Because there's a lot of growth going to happen in this area. So I think there's scope for people who've not got a background in the aged care business, which has been a fairly closed shop for a long time, to come in and purchase what they need to know and have operate, but do it through a different kind of platform, which is what Airbnb and Uber are. There are issues that we as a consumer movement face in terms of standards and competencies, but I'm sure that they can be dealt with. There'll be new disruptive ways, if you like, to use that example, that are not available now just because the whole supply is frozen. I think that more of potential users of aged care services will have a stronger sense of the need for control. I just want to say that this is not a kind of one generation does and the other doesn't. I've been arguing for these kind of changes in aged care for best part of 2 decades, and I've done that in response to older people saying we'd like more control. People are always a bit amazed when they hit the aged care system that, having run their lives, all their lives, they're suddenly not allowed to anymore, and they're regarded as some kind of almost infant because they've got a disability or a frailty. Whereas they often have a very, very good idea, particularly after the initial support transition period, of what it is that would really help them to deal with whatever their problem is. I think we will see quite a lot of pressure for these changes to come even faster than might be predicted. Look, I think it's important to recognise and acknowledge the degree of cultural change this involves for providers, and therefore there'll need to be transition arrangements and support in that process. We'll also need that kind of support in the consumer movement. Where does the consumer go for support? It won't remove the need for advocacy, for example, as indeed, for example, when we freed up the telecommunications market or we freed up the energy markets, we've had to provide good consumer support and good consumer protection frameworks. We'll continue to need those as we move into this new aged care system. But the new aged care system will be more resilient and more responsive. It will also, over time, I predict, become more user pays, but that's the only way that we will have a system that's viable enough that we can always be sure that people without resources will be able to still get quality aged care.